I'm Max.
My name is Xenia Tarbobala.
My name is Gerardo.
My name is Claire.
Hi, I'm Stacey Zamskaya.
My name is Lana Zemsky.
I speak Russian and English.
I speak English, a little bit of Hindi, like basic, and Gujarati.
I speak English, Spanish, and I've been trying to learn Portuguese.
I speak English and French.
I speak Russian, Ukrainian, and English.
I speak Russian, Ukrainian, and English.
Growing up, I only spoke Spanish at home, and that was my first language, so I didn't really get exposed to English until I went to school. And I picked it up really fast. And my dad always likes to brag because I remember during like a teacher parent conference, the teacher had asked him if he speaks English, and he was like, "No, I don't." So my teacher was like, "So how does he speak English?" Because he's really fluent in English and Spanish. So I assumed that you both, either like my mom or my dad, spoke English or Spanish, or spoke English well.
So, whenever I was a little kid, my parents spoke to me both in Gujarati and in English. And when I went to visit when I went to visit family in India, they were like usually some members that only spoke in Gujarati that tried to teach me how to speak Gujarati. They did do that for a short time where my mom only spoke to me in Gujarati and she tried that way, but that was very, very short-ended. Um, as I grew up and at the age of like 11 and 12, the way it would work is that me and my brother would get really good at speaking Gujarati because we would go and visit India and we would be speaking it. But then we would come back and spend a lot of time outside of our home and we would sometimes kind of forget the language, not completely forget about it, specifically how to understand it. I feel like I've had a really good understanding of Gujarati. I've just had a hard times pronouncing it sometimes because also with the accents and all. But overall, I believe I learned Gujarati from like usually like going to India and speaking it with the family members.
My mom is American and my dad is French, and I was growing up in the US. So they wanted from the get-go that I know both languages. So from the time I was born, pretty much, my mom only spoke to me in English and my dad only spoke to me in French. And then I went to preschool at a French immersion school. So it was mostly French for like all of like the subjects, except we had English twice a week.
I was born in Ukraine, and our family has a lot of Russian speaking family members, especially folks like our grandparents, our great grandparents. During World War II, a number of them immigrated from Russia into Ukraine. And so at home, we always spoke Russian. So the first language I ever learned was Russian, and that was our predominant language that we spoke at home. And it was very interesting because we lived in the western part of Ukraine, which has historically been Ukrainian speaking. So we were sort of a minority in terms of the language that we spoke. So everywhere outside of our house, everybody spoke Ukrainian. So I learned Ukrainian when I first started going to preschool. And the running joke at the house was that I spoke Ukrainian better than Russian when I was a little kid. And then when I started going to school, I went to a special school where they taught both Russian and Ukrainian. So in school, we learned both languages, which was again unique to the rest of the schools in the city because the main language there would have been Ukrainian and not Russian.
My family was interesting because my mom was Russian and her family speaks Russian, all her relatives. And my dad's family was Ukrainian, and his parents were speaking Ukrainian all the time. Then when I visit my grandma and grandpa, from my dad's side, I used to speak Ukrainian. Then my grandma, she was a teacher of Ukrainian language and literature. Then she introduced me to all those mm, pieces of literature, like you can imagine. Then for me, it was always like two languages, no problem. When I visit my relatives in a village, all village speak Ukrainian, then for me, it was absolutely normal to be able to speak two languages and no problem at all.
So I, growing up, or Russian is my first language, so I had to do like an ESL program in order to learn English, and I was in that up until like fourth grade, or starting in fourth grade. But with Russian, I don't know. I guess like my mom was teaching me from a very young age. She really wanted me to hold on to the language. She would actually purposely make me fail like the English test to keep me in the ESL program, um, so that I would keep learning Russian as I got older.
The school I went to had an ESL program, English as a second language, and I basically spent half the day in that program, practicing English, learning English with a teacher, and within like 6 months, I was able to communicate a lot better, and was able to really master English in the first couple of years of us living in Ukraine or living in the US. The ESL program was fantastic, and I think the teachers really valued it because my regular third grade teacher could not communicate with me. Other than through hand motions or, a word here or there. It was very difficult for her to understand my needs and for me to understand what was happening in the classroom, what she was trying to teach us, obviously not knowing the language. I had no idea what was going on.
Growing up, I went to like bilingual school, so it was actually encouraged that we talk in Spanglish or like we mix languages up. But I remember in first grade, like my teacher was like she was like a newer teacher to the program. So she would be like, if you're gonna start a sentence, like it has to be fully in English or it has to be fully in Spanish. So she really did not like the Spanglish at all. And that was one of the first times where I was like, whoa, like I never had like rules to like grammar. It was like you can speak however you want.
We start studying English when we decide to move to America, and we were studying that English in Ukraine. We took like 3 times a week lessons, but we didn't understand that we are studying British English.
Mhm.
When we came here to America, it was like, oh my God, what language do they speak? Because we didn't understand anything.
I think once I like hit fourth grade, there was like a lot of pressure to learn English more than anything. I think a lot of it had to do with culture more than anything. Over time, though, uh, my English skills have surpassed my Russian skills. Like at this point in my life, I like am purposely trying to do as much as possible to retain my Russian skills, like changing my phone to being fully in Russian or whatever.
Yes, English is definitely more dominant, only because like I haven't visited India in like more than 4 plus years. I do still speak Gujarati with my grandparents when I call with them, but
Mhm.
it's more of like basic Gujarati um language. Sometimes like I do ask them like what a certain word means because they also do speak English, but I do speak with them in Gujarati, like trying to practice my skills and try to keep it up.
English, I mean, it's sort of become my predominant language. I spent majority of my life in the US now, speaking English. I think in English. Even when I'm speaking in a different language, my thoughts are still happening in English. So it is definitely the language that I think I'm most advanced in.
In English, because I'm able to play around with the language more, I feel like I'm a little more goofy. I'm a little bit more Like I speak really fast and I ramble. In French, I have to be very specific about what I say so I can be more serious in French and more yeah, more serious and I sound more mature when I speak in French because I think because I have a limited vocabulary and I think because it already has a very limited vocabulary in French, you kind of like sound more formal than you speak. I feel like I see myself as more mature when I speak in French.
My vocabulary in Russian maybe like 100 times bigger than in English. Then, if you want to hear something fancy and smart from me, it's much easier for me to speak Russian than you can translate it. I believe I still think in Russian and I translate everything in my head before I said, and I'm looking for the word all the time, like that the correct one. Sometimes I forgot what is that, but I think it's very different for me in communicating English and communicating Russian because in Russian I'm comfortable. I'm never afraid to say some specific word. I know exactly what it means, and my pronunciation in English, I wish it best, but no.
Well, Russian just feels a little more formal just because I'm not familiar with like the slang. But there's definitely a lot of situations where it's very useful, like communicating with people. Like if I'm going to Ukrainian village, it's very convenient for me to like be able to speak to the people there.
I guess that Spanish, like, it is very dramatic, I would say. It can definitely be dramatic. And I grew up watching like a lot of soap operas, so that's kind of where I get like why people have that stereotype. So whenever I like get mad, they'll be like, "Oh, like you sound very Latin, or you sound like that sounded very angry," and I'm like, "Oh, it didn't. I'm just like, I'm trying to have a normal conversation." But
I guess maybe it's my like very basic Russian knowledge or just like being able to uh, speak it in a conversational setting. But I feel like I can get a lot more creative with things I want to say in English than in Russian. But then again, Russian has entire dictionaries of curse words. So
Yeah. Definitely easier to talk about more emotional and abstract things in English.
Mhm.
In French, it's useful for cussing. That's really, I don't know if it's because like I grew up with more people cussing around me in French that it kind of like has more of like cathartic feel, but I like cussing in French better than I like cussing in English.
I think in terms of humor, when I'm with somebody who like is very fluent in Russian and is like comfortable speaking in Russian, like usually I'm making jokes in Russian specifically.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. There's just certain words like you said, like the way you can add like in terms of like cussing in Russian, like the way that you
Mhm.
can phrase it, you can do it in like so many weird, like unique ways that like
I love swearing in Russian.
it's so
It's
fun.
to me, honestly, like, yeah, that's how I feel. Like whenever I see like a Latino person, I'm always like, oh, I want to speak to them in Spanish because maybe they speak Spanish.
Mhm.
And also Spanish is nice because I feel like since there's like a lot of monolinguals, like you can easily like talk about stuff that maybe is out of like or maybe like not appropriate. Like can be like, oh, like how do you feel about like the decorations? Like I don't know. I'm thinking of like a party. Like how do you feel about decorations or like, oh, do you see that person over there? Like I don't know. Like you can talk about stuff like that, and like nobody will know because nobody speaks Spanish, or like theoretically, like you'll be in a place where nobody speaks Spanish.
It's fun speaking French in the US
Mhm.
because my dad and I can go to a lot of places and have our own little secret language and shit talk people. We haven't been caught yet. That's my worst fear is talking shit about someone and them turning around and be like, actually, I speak French. That hasn't happened yet. Um, but that's been very fun. It's not the case in France. Everyone knows English, so you can't do that.
To me, speaking a different language isn't a big deal like how some people make it to be. I know in the US, like it's a big deal whenever you can put on your resume speaking languages, but if we're being honest with ourselves, in most other countries, it's like required for school to like always speak like in other languages, or like in school, you're constantly always learning another language or learning another language at home.
Now, in the US, especially nowadays, because I grew up here and I don't really have an accent, um, most people don't even think that I speak multiple languages. It sort of comes as a shock to people when they find out that I actually speak a different language. And it's not something that I tell people right away after I meet them. It's something that if it comes up in conversation, I'll mention. And it like 99% of the time is a surprise, and people don't expect to hear that at all.
It is so strange because nobody thinks I can speak Russian. Like I look very, very American. But then some people will say that I look very European, so I don't know what that's about. But like there's this one time I was visiting the hospital and the woman who was like helping me with my tests or whatever started talking to her coworker, like one of the nurses there in Russian, talking about my diagnosis like in front of me. And I was like, hey guys, like I speak Russian. And that completely changed like the whole tone of the conversation. Not just because I like caught them talking about it, but also because they were kind of like shocked.
Yeah, there's like automatic coolness factor that's added when I tell people I speak French.
Mhm.
Um, when I was trying to like fit in middle school, it would kind of be my go-to to kind of like stand out and like kind but like in a cool way because people are fascinated about the culture and if the stereotypes about French people were real and because it had such like a distinct like American perception, it was very easy for people to like be super fascinated about it. Now I don't say it from the get-go because I find that it kind of I don't necessarily think of it like distorts people's perceptions of me, but it definitely like I don't know. It's something that I want to come out naturally, that it makes sense that like I'd think this way because of this. I feel like not necessarily it's language, it's more culture. Some things I think differently because of the French culture as opposed to American culture.
It it would have felt weird not knowing Gujarati growing up. Like if my parents only talked to me in English, it
Mhm.
was very, very weird because like I wouldn't know even like what food I'm eating because like there's some words that are like on some of the foods we eat only don't have English words. And it's also a part of like who my parents are as pe people. So it would have been like I would have felt like I wouldn't have known a piece of them.
Mhm.
Because they speak Gujarati a lot at home. I feel like if I didn't know Gujarati or Hindi, I would be a different person because I feel like learning the two languages also brought me closer to my culture.
When you learn a new language, you also kind of learn like the history and like the culture behind it. And that's what I feel grateful for. Like when I go to Mexico, like sometimes my cousins will ask me like, oh, like do you know like what happened during this year? And I'll be like, oh yeah, like Spain, like so, something related to Spain or like what is it? Or like colonialism. Like I'll be like, yeah, I know all that stuff. Like I was taught that.
It's one of the reasons why I've always like felt in the middle because on one side, where I grew up, even though growing up in the US and like going and going to school here, I always felt a little weird and left out because the elementary school I went to, the school I went to was just not that diverse.
Mhm.
So, and I also had a lot of Indian features that I got made fun of. So I like sometimes got teased for that. Like people would pull my hair, just like a stupid, silly elementary school bullying. And like looking back, um, well, the hair pulling did hurt, but and like the other teasing, like it did like emotionally mess with me. Although, but that definitely like made me feel like, oh, like I'm not American. And then I would go to India, and then they would be like, oh my God, you can't even like speak the whole language, or like you can like the like you get stared at on the street because even if you're wearing traditional clothing, I don't know how they know, but they just like know from your face. Maybe if it's the way that we walk or stare or like how we're acting in the streets, but they know that you're not from there. And so, and they would be like, oh, like you live in the U. And I would always be told like, oh, you live in the U.S. now, so you're like American. But then I'll be like, in America, they would be like, okay, yeah, but you're not white. So I was like, oh, okay. So I'm like, okay, then what am I?
Once I started getting like into other activities, so for example, like I did theater and I did choir, and these are like areas where you don't really see a lot of like Mexican people or a lot of Mexican kids, like especially like in my area, like a lot of those programs are predominantly white, and so I started to get like a lot of hate. I feel like from my own peers, like they'll be like, "Oh, you only want to hang out with white people," or like you only want to do white people activities, and I was like, I don't think it's necessarily like a color or a race thing. Like it's just an activity. Just because we're not there doesn't mean that there's no space for us in those types of programs. Like you can go ahead and audition for the show. You don't have to be white. You know what I mean?
Having even some opportunity to learn a different language is very useful. I think it definitely shapes how you better understand the other language, the other culture, but also helps you understand your current language even better. Obviously, different languages have different grammar, and I don't know. I think it's really useful to know more than one language and be able to communicate with people that speak that language in situations where that becomes useful. And I feel like once you learn one other language, then you're just like on a roll of being able to understand other basics or other things around grammar in other languages or even words because there's so many similarities.
Some very smart people, they said, like, as many languages you know, the я тебе скажу по-русски. Сколько языков ты знаешь, столько раз ты человек.
Mm-hmm.
Then the more languages you know, it's better because every next language you decide to study will be much easier because sometimes you feel like you're cheating because you know like so many words that come in from another language.
If that's everything you want to share, then that can be it.
It is.
It is. Hurrah!